On a chilly Thanksgiving night in Boston, a quiet dinner table turns into the stage for a storm of hidden truths, debts, and long-buried emotions. What begins as a cozy family gathering soon unravels into a gripping story of love, sacrifice, and hard boundaries. To respect the privacy of those involved, I've changed their names and locations, but the emotions and lessons remain real. So lean in, listen closely, and follow this journey with me. And if you haven't yet subscribed, make sure to do so now, hit the like button, and leave a comment saying I'm listening so we can stay connected and share more stories together. November 24th, 2022. The brownstone at 122 Beacon Street glowed with the warm scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon spice pumpkin pie, and cranberry sauce still cooling in a glass bowl. Outside, the chill of Boston pressed against the old brick walls, but inside, the rooms flickered with lamplight and the clink of silverware being laid on Wedgwood plates. I had polished that flatware earlier in the afternoon, humming quietly as I set the table. After all, Thanksgiving was supposed to be about comfort, about tradition. My name is Eleanor Nora Hayes, 66 years old, a retired librarian from the Boston Public Library. Books and silence had been my companions for most of my life. That night, I told myself I was simply grateful to have company at the table again. My son, Ethan, had promised he would bring his girlfriend, Tiffany. Ethan is 34, a carpenter working with a construction crew in Somerville. Strong hands, callous from wood and sawdust, but too often restless, too often lost. Tiffany Walsh, 29, sells designer clothes at a boutique on Newbury Street. Chic, stylish, with a sharp tongue that rarely missed its target. They arrived with the rush of cold air through the front door. Ethan carried a bottle of wine, his shoulders hunched as if weighed down by more than just the November wind. Tiffany stepped in behind him, heels clicking on the wooden floor, eyes darting around the living room that smelled faintly of old paper and oak furniture. "It always smells like old books in here," Tiffany muttered, wrinkling her nose as she slid out of her coat. Then, louder, with a half-smile, "Why keep all these piles of dusty books, Nora? Don't they just take up space?" I forced a gentle smile, balancing the tray of cranberry sauce in my hands as I walked toward the dining table. "Books don't take anyone's share of the meal, dear," I said, setting the dish down carefully. "They only wait quietly until someone needs them." Ethan shot me an apologetic glance, then turned away quickly, as if afraid Tiffany might notice. I tried to smooth the moment over, pouring wine into 3 glasses. The candles flickered against the walls, the silver gleamed, the turkey was carved and waiting. For a moment, it felt like peace. But peace, as I've learned, is fragile. It happened when Tiffany reached for her glass, her red-painted nails tapping lightly against the stem. She tilted her head and spoke suddenly, her voice cutting through the clatter of forks and the soft jazz humming from the radio. "Ethan told me you've been hiding something, Nora," she said matter-of-factly. "He said you kept a check that belonged to Mark. Where is it? What happened to it?" The sound of silver on porcelain froze midair. Forks and knives hovered. My heart skipped, then sank, as if the weight of her words had pulled the whole evening underwater. "What are you talking about?" Ethan snapped, his voice sharp, his face turning red. He leaned toward her, eyes wide. "Why would you say that?" Tiffany shrugged, her shoulders rising like it was the simplest thing in the world. "It's inheritance money, isn't it? Where did it go? Or did it just disappear?" I set my wine glass down slowly. The stem trembled between my fingers before I released it. My voice came out measured, low, and steady, every word weighed before I let it leave my mouth. "If you want to ask me directly," I said, my eyes moving from Tiffany to Ethan, "then tonight, we will speak directly." The Howard Miller clock on the mantelpiece began to strike 9. Each heavy chime rolled through the room, beating against the silence, pulling us all into the storm that was about to begin. "Which check are you talking about?" I asked quietly, my voice low but steady. My hands were already moving, almost on instinct, toward the buffet against the far wall. The oak cabinet had been with me since Mark and I bought the house, its drawers smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. I pulled one open, the wood creaking, and took out a worn blue folder thick with papers. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, rubbing his thumb against the edge of his napkin. Tiffany crossed her legs, her heel tapping on the hardwood floor. The turkey sat untouched in the middle of the table, steam rising in silent curls. "Mark, your father," I said as I laid the folder down on the tablecloth, "left only this house and a few boxes of jazz records. There was no secret check." My voice cracked a little on the last word, but I straightened my back and began opening the folder. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of receipts neatly stapled in chronological order. "Since March," I continued, "I've been paying $650 a month to cover your car loan." I slid the first set of papers across the table. The logo of Boston Municipal Credit Union gleamed under the dining room light. Ethan's name, the loan number #BT6912, the payment stamps, all right there in black and white. Ethan's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. His fingers twitched toward the papers, then drew back, as if the ink might burn him. "And," I added softly, pulling out another sheet, "I paid $2,800 in legal fees for the DUI in Suffolk County this past May." This time my voice didn't shake. I pushed the lawyer's invoice across the table too. The room went very still. The only sound was the ticking of the Howard Miller clock in the corner. Tiffany's face flushed deep red, she put her hand to her mouth. "DUI," she whispered, eyes wide. "That's real?" "Yes," I said, looking straight at both of them. I was protecting my son, not hiding anyone's money. Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I was going to tell you after dinner," he muttered, staring at his hands. I took a breath, slow and deliberate. "After dinner," I said, "things only get delayed another day." My words were quiet but heavy, dropping into the space between us like stones into water. I began gathering the rest of the papers back into the folder, my fingers steady though my heart pounded. Around us, the candles flickered. Outside, the streetlights along Beacon Street glowed cold against the November night. The warmth of the turkey, the smell of spices, all of it seemed far away. This was not how I'd imagined Thanksgiving. But sometimes truth arrives uninvited, and it will sit at your table whether there's a place set for it or not. Everything began long before the Thanksgiving table. It began on a wet, black March night, when the phone on my bedside table started to ring at 2:03 a.m. The sound cut through the stillness like a blade. I fumbled for my glasses, blinking at the glowing screen. "Ethan," it read. My heart dropped even before I swiped to answer. "Mom," his voice was shaky, low, barely held together. In the background I could hear the hiss of rain and the occasional whoosh of a car passing. I'm being held. I'm outside Tremont Street, in front of the police station. Can you, please, come?" I sat up straight, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Held? Ethan, what happened?" "I messed up. Just, please come." His voice cracked on the last word. Within minutes, I had thrown on my old navy wool coat and pulled boots over my socks. The house was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock as I grabbed my keys. Outside, the wind off the Charles sliced at my face, 35 degrees Fahrenheit and falling, the kind of damp cold that seeps into your bones. My 2008 Corolla shuddered awake as I turned the key. I drove through empty streets, past shuttered shops and blinking traffic lights, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I reached Tremont Street, the rain was falling in fine needles under the street lamps. Ethan stood there on the sidewalk, hunched, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked so much older and so much younger all at once, a grown man with a boy's frightened eyes. He slid into the passenger seat, water dripping onto the floor mats. "I swear, Mom, it's just this once," he stammered, his hands shaking as he tried to wipe his face. "Please don't tell Tiffany. Please." I didn't speak at first. I just drove, the windshield wipers squeaking in a steady rhythm. My heart was thudding with a mixture of fear, relief, and something heavier I didn't want to name yet. Back home, I made him change out of his wet clothes and handed him a towel. The kitchen smelled faintly of mint from the tea I was brewing. I reached for my blue-covered notebook, the one I used for bills, notes, and things I couldn't risk forgetting, and wrote down the date, the time, the location. A librarian's habit: record everything, even what hurts. Ethan sat at the table, staring at his mug of tea. "I'll pay it back," he whispered. "Give me 3 months." He couldn't meet my eyes. 3 months slipped into 8. The promise turned into a line of dashes across my notebook, each dash another payment I made on his behalf. I told myself I was protecting him, that this was what mothers did. I hadn't counted the real cost, the misunderstandings, the quiet contempt, the way silence becomes its own weapon. That night at the police station was supposed to be the bottom. Instead, it became the beginning of a secret I carried alone, a secret that, months later, would explode across a Thanksgiving table. The dining table was set like a photograph from another time, a gray and silver checkered cloth smoothed until no wrinkle remained, Wedgwood plates catching the glow of candlelight, and cutlery polished until it gleamed like ice. I had laid it all out hours earlier, hoping that some old-fashioned grace might hold the evening together. Outside, the March air was sharp, but inside, the turkey's warmth still floated through the brownstone, mingling with cinnamon and baked apples. Tiffany reached for her phone before even touching her fork. She angled it toward the pumpkin pie, her face framed by the soft yellow bulbs overhead. "This lighting is so old, Nora," she said with a light laugh, swiping at her screen. "It makes everything look sepia." I kept my hands steady as I ladled gravy onto a platter of sliced turkey. "Those lights are from 1989, I replied, my voice even. "I installed them myself." For a moment she didn't respond, just tilted her head and snapped another photo. Ethan sat beside her, hunched, eyes glued to his own screen, thumbs tapping rapidly. He hadn't looked at me since he sat down. His beer glass left little rings of condensation on the polished wood. Tiffany finally put her phone down, looking around at the shelves lined with books, the framed photographs, the chipped teacup that had been Mark's. "You know," she said, "in Boston now, everyone's going for the minimalist look. Clean, white walls, no clutter. It's kind of the standard." Her eyes flicked toward the floor-to-ceiling bookcase as if it were an eyesore. I took a breath, spooning gravy over the turkey breast. "Minimal isn't throwing away memories," I said quietly. Ethan let out a low mutter, almost under his breath, but I caught it. "You don't know anything about other people's memories," he said, eyes still downcast. The air at the table tightened. Tiffany's shoulders stiffened, she glanced at him but then looked back at me. "I just want everything to be transparent," she said, her brows knitting. "When money isn't clear, it's worrying." I placed a slice of apple cinnamon pie onto a plate, the crust still warm, the sugar glistening. "Tonight will be clear," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Everything that needs to be said will be said." Outside the wide bay window, the Charles River glittered under the streetlights, dark and cold, moving straight and sure toward the harbor. I looked at it for a moment, taking strength from its unbending flow. At the table, Tiffany adjusted her napkin, Ethan's fingers kept drumming against his phone, and I felt the distance between us like 3 separate worlds sharing one meal. Yet beneath the candlelight, amid the scents of turkey and pie, the truth was gathering, ready to be spoken. It happened so fast I almost missed it, the moment when politeness cracked and something sharper came through. Tiffany, who had been pushing her fork gently around her plate of turkey, looked up suddenly, her tone careless but her words pointed. "I mean," she said with a little laugh, "what would a retired librarian really know about finances?" Her voice hung in the air like the faint hum of a neon sign. Ethan's head jerked up. I felt the weight of her sentence, not as an insult exactly, but as a door being pushed open. I set down my wineglass slowly and folded my hands on the tablecloth. "I know enough," I replied evenly, enough to recognize that a store card on Newberry Street charging 21% interest is daylight robbery. My eyes held hers. Tiffany blinked, caught off guard. You know about that card?" she stammered, a flush rising on her cheeks. "Yes," I said. I reached to the sideboard and picked up a pale envelope I'd placed there before dinner, my fingers steady despite the tremor in my chest. Bills still come here, addressed to me as the mailing address. Owner of the card, Tiffany Walsh. Mailing address, Nora Hayes. Here. I slid the envelope across the table. It landed just in front of her plate with a soft whisper of paper against cloth. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice low. She just used Mom's address to make it easier, he murmured, not looking up. His thumb traced the edge of his napkin, his shoulders tight. No one asked me, I said quietly, drawing a deep breath. But the statements still arrive every month. My words came out softer than I expected but carried their own weight. Tiffany's jaw tightened. She reached for the envelope but didn't open it, her manicured fingers pressing into the paper. I only bought the boots, she said quickly. They were for work. Her voice cracked on the last word. I turned my gaze to Ethan. And you, I said, my tone still even but harder now. The Celtics bet in June, $1,450. Ethan flinched as if the number itself had slapped him. I planned to pay it back when my bonus came in, he muttered, eyes on his lap. His hands were clenched into fists on the tablecloth. I straightened in my chair, feeling the old librarian's steel rise up in me. The bonus didn't come, I said slowly, but the truth did. My voice was like a door clicking shut. The room went still. Outside the window, the Charles River shimmered under the streetlights, cold and exact. Inside, the turkey grew cool on its platter, the candle flames wavered, and for the first time that evening, neither Ethan nor Tiffany had anything left to say. I reached for the blue-covered notebook I had kept on the sideboard for months. Its edges were worn soft, the corners bent from being opened and closed so many times. Inside, every page was neat, each line filled with my handwriting, dates, times, amounts, names. I opened it slowly at the table, the way a teacher might open a grade book. The paper smelled faintly of ink and mint tea. This, I said quietly, is not a weapon. It's a record. My voice trembled only slightly as I turned the first page and flattened it with my palm. April 5th, I began, reading aloud, $650 paid to Boston Municipal Credit Union. I slid a stapled receipt across the table, the logo of the credit union printed in blue at the top. May 18th, $2,800 in legal fees. Another paper joined the first. June 22nd, $1,450 transferred to FanDuel under Ethan's account, marked mistaken transfer. Each item landed like a stone dropped into water. The silence thickened. Ethan's head bent lower and lower until his chin almost touched his chest. His hands had disappeared beneath the table, clasped tightly in his lap. I could see his knuckles widening. Tiffany had stopped breathing through her mouth. She pressed a crumpled napkin to her lips, eyes fixed on the black print as though the numbers themselves could explain what words could not. I'm not showing you this to humiliate you, I said at last, looking directly at my son. I'm showing it to stop the running, the dodging, the pretending. To end the hiding. He swallowed hard. I'll do anything, he whispered, his voice shaking. Just don't leave me, Mom. I reached across the table and laid my hand over the notebook. Leave you? I said softly. No. I'm only leaving the role of firefighter. I'm stepping out of the flames. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The Howard Miller clock on the mantel ticked loudly, each second counting down to something new. We're going to pay each bill, I continued. Not with promises. With a plan. Step by step. My eyes flicked between them. That's the only way this ends differently. Tiffany cleared her throat. Her voice came out small. I'm sorry for the way I spoke earlier, she murmured, fingers twisting the napkin. Apologies have to walk hand in hand with change, I said, closing the notebook with a quiet snap. The clock struck 10. The chimes filled the room, slow and deep, echoing off the walls. Outside, the Charles River moved on under its winter lights, cold but unwavering. Inside, the papers lay neatly in a row between us, not accusations but proof, a path out of the storm if only we chose to follow it. I hesitated for a long moment before speaking. My fingers traced the rim of my coffee cup, still warm from the pot I had brewed to steady my nerves. The table between us was a battlefield of papers, plates, and unsaid words. Finally, I looked at Ethan and Tiffany, my voice low but steady. To make the July payment, I said softly, I sold Mark's trumpet. Ethan's head snapped up as if I had slapped him. Dad's trumpet, he blurted, pushing back his chair so quickly it scraped against the wooden floor. Mom, why didn't you tell me? His eyes were wide, a mixture of hurt and disbelief. I drew in a slow breath, feeling the ache in my chest as I met his gaze. Because you were busy making promises, I replied quietly. And I was busy putting out fires. For a moment the room went silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey still lingered, but it felt far away. In my mind, I saw Mark holding that trumpet again, the best in 1967 with the small dent near the bell, playing soft jazz at Wally's Cafe on Sunday nights. That trumpet had been a piece of our history, a sound of smoky rooms and late-night walks home. I took it to the music shop on Mass Avenue, I continued, my hands now folded tightly in my lap. They gave me $1,100. Just enough for 1 month's breathing room. Tiffany let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her chest. I had no idea, she murmured, her voice thin. No one did, I said, and this time my voice cracked. Because burdens usually travel with silence. People see the surface, the dinner, the books, the steady smile, but they don't see the ledger in my notebook or the nights I can't sleep. Ethan sat back down slowly, his face pale. He reached across the table, hesitating before resting his hand lightly on my shoulder. Mom, he said, his voice breaking, I'm so sorry. His eyes were shiny with unshed tears. I nodded, covering his hand with mine. Sorry is a beginning, I said gently. Repaying what's owed is the road. Each word came out deliberate, like stepping stones laid across a stream. The old clock ticked on. Outside, the Charles River glimmered under the streetlights, indifferent and steady. Inside, the three of us sat in the soft glow of the dining room, the weight of what had been lost finally visible. The trumpet was gone, but maybe, just maybe, something else could be built in its place, honesty, boundaries, and a new kind of respect. The room had gone very quiet after the talk of the trumpet. The candles were burning low, their wax pooling at the base. The turkey sat cold on its platter, a few crumbs of pie scattered on the plates. Ethan stared at the table, shoulders slumped, while Tiffany twisted her napkin into a rope. The tension was thick enough to taste. Then Tiffany drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly, like someone bracing for a plunge. There's something else I need to say, she murmured, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I didn't speak. I simply folded my hands and waited. I signed a lease, she continued after a moment, her voice steadier now. A 1-bedroom apartment at 14 Hemingway. Just, in case I need it. Ethan's head snapped up. You what? He barked, his chair creaking as he turned toward her. You're planning to move out? When? Tiffany lifted her chin, but her eyes were red and shiny. When you stop using me as a shield with your mother, she said, her voice trembling but clear. When you stop hiding behind me. I felt my own breath catch. For months, I had watched the two of them glide through dinners and errands, a polite facade over something brittle. This was the first time the mask cracked. Ethan pushed his plate away, fists clenching on the table. I don't, he started, but Tiffany cut him off, her voice low but firm. You owe your mother. You owe me. You owe yourself. I'm tired. Her fingers went still on the napkin, white knuckles showing. Ethan shot up from his chair, his hand balling into a fist that he swung uselessly through the air. I'll pay it all back, he shouted, voice raw. I swear. The words echoed in the room, but they sounded empty to me. I straightened, picking up my pen and a clean sheet of paper from the folder still on the table. My voice came out cool, measured. "Swearing doesn't pay bills," I said. "A plan does." I drew 3 short lines across the paper. Number 1, I wrote, speaking as I did. The car loan. Number 2, the DUI fees. Number 3, the Celtics bet. The scratch of the pen was loud in the silence. Then I looked up at Ethan. "And number 4, I added, you move out of the attic within 30 days. He stared at me, stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a boy caught in the rain. The attic had been a refuge after his back surgery, a place to heal. But he was healing now. Outside the window, the Charles River glinted cold and straight, carrying the city's lights downstream. Inside, the 3 of us sat in the glow of a dinner gone cold, the air heavy but also, strangely, cleaner. The truths had been spoken. The evasion was over. All that was left was the work of rebuilding. Ethan stared at me as if I had just spoken another language. 30 days, he repeated, his voice catching. His fork clinked against the plate, forgotten. "You're really saying I have to leave the attic?" I nodded slowly, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "The attic was always meant to be temporary," I reminded him. "You needed it after your back surgery in February. You were recovering, and I wanted you safe." My fingers smoothed the edge of the paper where I had written out the plan. "But your back is healing now. You've been doing your therapy. You can stand on your own feet again." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck the way he used to as a boy when he was cornered. His eyes darted to Tiffany, who swallowed hard before speaking. "If you need," she said quietly, I could help with the deposit. On the new place. As long as you take responsibility." Her voice trembled at the edges, but there was a steadiness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. I felt a small swell of gratitude toward her, but I shook my head. "Thank you, Tiffany," I said softly. "But Ethan needs to sign the lease in his own name. He needs to pay on time. This isn't about money. It's about learning to carry his own weight." Ethan dropped his gaze to the table. "I get it," he muttered. "I guess I always knew this was coming." His thumb rubbed at a spot on the tablecloth, as if he could erase the words written between us. I reached into the folder and pulled out a printed budget template I'd made earlier that day. Columns for income, fixed expenses, debt payments. Rows for each month. I slid it across to him, the paper whispering against the cloth. "This will help you map it out," I said. "Your projected income, fixed costs, and how much to pay each month toward your debts. It's not complicated. But it has to be honest." For the first time that night, he looked directly at me. There was fear there, yes, but also a flicker of something else, resolve. "You'll still be around?" he asked, his voice low. I reached out and laid my hand on his. "Always," I said, giving it a small squeeze. "I'm still your mother. But I'm not your wallet anymore." He took a breath, then another, as though trying on the idea of breathing on his own. "Okay," he whispered. "I understand." "Good," I said, smiling faintly. "Let's finish dinner. Tomorrow we start the real work." Outside, the first snow of the season drifted past the window, soft and clean, erasing the old footprints on the street below. It looked like a blank page ready for new writing. Inside, at the table, the 3 of us sat together, still a family but on the edge of something new, a harder kind of love, but one that might finally help us all stand. That night, when the last fork had been dried and the last plate stacked neatly back into the cupboard, I stood alone in the kitchen. The scent of turkey and cinnamon still clung to the air, but under it was the faint smell of dish soap and steel from the sink. My hands were damp, smelling of lemon detergent. I reached up and unlatched the old wooden window above the sink, pushing it open with a creak. A gust of night air rolled in, sharp and clean, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of the Charles River. The streetlights outside reflected in the water like trembling gold. From somewhere across the river came the distant sound of a train horn, and for a moment the city felt both endless and intimate. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, shivering. I leaned on the counter, looking out, and my mind drifted back to the years at the library, the hushed reading rooms, the smell of old glue-binding spines, the faint scent of paper dust and human skin that clung to well-loved books. People came in and out, searching for answers, for stories, for a place to rest. I had always believed love was like that, a room you kept open, a door without a lock. But tonight I had learned again, or maybe for the first time, that love without boundaries can rot at the edges, harming the giver as much as the receiver. That realization sat heavy in my chest but also strangely light, like a truth finally spoken aloud. I reached for the blue notebook on the windowsill, flipped it open to a fresh page, and wrote in my neat script, November 24th, set new rules, transparency, planning, respect. My pen hovered for a second before underlining the words twice. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Ethan, "Thank you, Mom." Just 3 words, but they landed differently this time, no excuses, no deflection, just gratitude. A few minutes later, an email notification popped up. "Tiffany, I'm sorry for the way I spoke." It was long, detailed, outlining what she planned to change. Reading it, I felt something in my shoulders unclench. I put the phone down and made myself a mug of hot cocoa, the rich smell rising as I stirred. Steam curled up against my face. I pressed my forehead lightly to the cool glass of the windowpane, looking out at Boston washed silver by the streetlights. For the first time in months, the house felt quiet without feeling lonely. Then the phone rang, its sudden sound startling against the hush. An unknown number from Louisiana. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? This is Marcus O'Neill," a warm male voice said. 67 years old. "I don't know if you remember me, Nora?" A laugh bubbled out of me, soft but real. "Marcus," I said. "Of course I do." And in that moment I thought, the past really does have long legs. It can walk right up to your door when you least expect it. I sat down at the kitchen table with my mug of cooling cocoa still between my palms, the faint scent of chocolate mingling with the night air drifting in through the cracked window. The phone rested beside me, screen glowing with an unfamiliar Louisiana number. I hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over the answer button, before curiosity nudged me. "Hello?" I said cautiously. A warm, slightly raspy male voice filled my ear. "Nora Hayes? This is Marcus O'Neill. I don't know if you'd remember me." For a heartbeat, the name rolled around in my mind like an old coin pulled from a drawer. Then a rush of images, a lanky boy leaning against a locker at Dorchester High, a bass guitar case slung over his back, his laugh echoing down the hall. "Marcus," I breathed. "Of course I remember." He chuckled softly. "I read that interview they did with you in the library journal a couple years back. Couldn't believe it was you, still with the books. I had to call." I smiled, staring at the wood grain of my table. "Still with the books," I echoed. "And you?" "Still with the bass," he replied. "I moved down to New Orleans in '73. Play in a few clubs on Frenchman Street. Teach music at Tulane during the day. The city's been good to me." I could almost hear the background hum of a bar, a faint trumpet practicing somewhere, the clink of glasses. "I still have that picture from our senior class," he went on. 1974, you, short hair, hugging a stack of books in front of the Prudential building. You looked like you were about to run off and conquer the world." A laugh slipped from me, surprising and a little shy. "These days my hair hugs die instead of books," I teased. "Time does that to you." He laughed too, a low warm sound. "Next April's Jazz Fest," he said after a moment. "Why don't you come down? Let me show you the city. Beignet, café au lait, the Mississippi at sunset. It's a good place to sit and think of Boston. I stared out the window at the dark ribbon of the Charles River. That's a long way, I said, trying to keep my voice light. It's not as far as it sounds, Marcus said gently. Sometimes you just need to hear a new note. Something fluttered in my chest at his words, like the quick tremor of a trumpet before a song begins. I traced the rim of my mug with one finger. I'll think about it, I said finally, my voice softer. I'll consider it. Do that, he replied. I'll be here. When I hung up, the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My heart was beating faster than it had in years, not with fear but with a curious, tentative excitement. A new page was turning, one I hadn't planned for, one whose edges smelled faintly of brass and powdered sugar. The morning light slipped through the narrow kitchen window, casting long rectangles of gold across the linoleum floor. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint aroma of last night's cinnamon pie. I stood by the counter, buttering a slice of toast, when Ethan shuffled in wearing a worn hoodie and sweatpants, hair sticking up like it had when he was 12. He poured himself a mug of coffee, the steam curling up between us, and leaned against the doorway. Mom, he began, his voice hesitant. You shouldn't trust strangers on the internet. He took a sip, eyes darting away. I looked up from my toast and gave a small smile. Marcus isn't a stranger, I said. He's just been old too long. That's all. Ethan frowned, setting his mug down with a soft clink. But you haven't seen him in decades. What if it's a scam? His brow furrowed, a crease forming between his eyes, the same way it did when he was a boy worried about grades. I laid the knife down on the plate and met his gaze. At worst, it's no worse than the things you've put me through, I replied gently, though my tone held a quiet edge. And I survived those. He flinched a little at that, staring down at his coffee, fingers tracing the rim. The kitchen clock ticked above us, each second sounding louder than usual. Tiffany came in just then, phone in hand, her hair still damp from a shower. She glanced between us and, sensing the tension, cleared her throat. If you're really going, she said, let me find you a good deal on tickets. I'm pretty good at that. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Thank you, dear, but I'll pay for my own trip, and I'll go on my own decision, I said. My voice was calm but firm, and for a moment the kitchen felt like the library again, quiet but steady. While they sat at the table, I opened my laptop and pulled up Amtrak schedules. The blue and white screen reflected in my glasses. Boston to New York by train, then a flight to Louis Armstrong International in New Orleans. April 10, 2023. My fingers clicked as I noted down a small hotel in the Marigny neighborhood, 642 Frenchman Street, 2 nights to start. The address looked almost like a line from a song. Ethan watched me, his coffee forgotten. I'll drive you to Logan, he said after a long pause. But, you have to sign the debt plan first. I turned to him, surprised at the firmness in his tone, and then smiled. Deal, I said. That's exactly the kind of responsibility I wanted to see. He nodded, a flicker of pride, or maybe relief, passing over his face. Outside, the snow was melting into the gutters, and the street seemed to stretch southward like an open road. In the kitchen, between the smell of coffee and toast, a new kind of conversation was happening, one of trust, plans, and the courage to step beyond old limits. That evening, after the dishes had been dried and the snow outside turned the street into a quiet white path, I retreated to my bedroom. The lamp on my dresser cast a warm, amber glow over the quilt. I set down my glasses and reached for a wooden box tucked beneath the bed, a box that had traveled with me from one apartment to another, heavy with years. Its hinges creaked softly as I opened it. Inside lay photographs, ticket stubs, old letters, and pressed flowers flattened by time. I poured a small glass of bourbon, its amber liquid catching the light, and carried it to my record player. From the worn sleeve, I slid out a Louis Armstrong vinyl and placed it gently on the turntable. The needle crackled, then gave way to that unmistakable trumpet and gravelly voice. As What a Wonderful World filled the room, I felt the bourbon warm my chest and the music tug at the corners of my memory. I picked up an old black and white photo, Marcus leaning against a brick wall behind Dorchester High, base slung over his shoulder, his fingers mid-pluck as if the picture had caught him in motion. In another photo, I sat cross-legged on the grass with a notebook, marking Sylvia Plath poems with a red pen for the school literary club. The smell of cut grass and chalk dust came back to me as if it had been bottled and saved. Back then, Marcus would practice his bass after school behind the gym, and I would sit nearby under the maple tree, pretending to read but really listening. "You'll end up in New York," he used to tease. "Or London. Libraries can't hold you." But in 1975, instead of chasing a distant city, I chose Mark, steady, kind Mark, and a rented apartment in Jamaica Plain with squeaky floors and a leaky radiator. Safety had seemed like the bravest choice. I don't regret it, not truly. But some nights I wonder, quietly, what if? The question lingers like smoke but no longer stings. I reached for my phone and typed a message to Marcus, "I won't leave Boston. But I'll visit." My thumb hovered a second before pressing send. Almost immediately, the phone buzzed with his reply, "Just come. I'll handle the music." I smiled, imagining his fingers still sure on the strings of that bass. A soft knock at the door interrupted my reverie. "Mom?" Ethan's voice. I finished the debt plan. "Come in," I called. He handed me a neatly filled-out form. His handwriting was uneven but determined, $350 a month toward the debts, plus extra shifts at the furniture shop in Chelsea. He watched my face as I read. "This is a good start," I said, smiling up at him. For the first time in many months, I felt something unlock. I closed the ledger, then reached up and clicked the door latch. The house was quiet, but my heart wasn't closed anymore. Outside, Louis Armstrong played on, the trumpet bright and forgiving, as though it knew beginnings come in all ages. The 1st of December arrived cold and pale, the kind of Boston morning where the air feels brittle and every sound carries a little farther. From the kitchen window I could see Ethan's car parked at the curb, trunk propped open, a couple of cardboard boxes stacked beside it. The attic stairs had groaned under his steps all morning as he carried down his life, one armload at a time, duffel bags, toolboxes, a thrift store lamp he'd bought for his corner of the attic. I didn't hover. Instead, I busied myself at the counter, packing 2 plastic containers of leftover pasta and a small bag of apples into a grocery tote. It was my quiet way of helping without stepping in. Through the doorway I caught glimpses of Tiffany standing by the sidewalk, her coat buttoned up to the chin, breath fogging in the cold. She scrolled on her phone, then tucked it away, looking both anxious and resolved. When Ethan carried the last box out, he set it down on the curb with a thud and exhaled, rubbing his hands together. Tiffany stepped closer, brushing a leaf off her sleeve. "We're taking some space," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "It's what we need to grow up." Ethan nodded, eyes down. "Yeah," he said. "I need to learn how to be an adult." His voice was rough, but there was no anger in it. He reached out and hugged her quickly, a brief, clumsy embrace that seemed to say more than words. I stayed back by the porch, hands wrapped around the grocery tote. The wooden steps creaked under me as I shifted my weight. Part of me wanted to rush down, to smooth their hair, to tell them it would be okay. But I didn't. This was their moment, and my job now was to let it happen. When the car pulled away, boxes and duffels rattling in the back seat, the house fell into a new kind of silence. The kitchen felt bigger without Ethan's boots by the door. The old attic stairs no longer groaned with his late-night steps. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the clock tick, even the faint creak of the wooden beams overhead. Yet the quiet didn't taste bitter. It felt clear, like the first glass of cold water in the morning. I set the grocery tote aside and opened my planner. For the first time in months, I filled it with my own appointments, a dental checkup, a long overdue haircut, a flu shot. Small, ordinary acts of self-care that had been pushed to the back of my mind. On the next page I wrote my travel dates in neat blue ink: Boston, NYC, New Orleans, April. Seeing the route laid out like that made me smile. My life, once a jumble of crises and quick fixes, was starting to look like the index of a well-kept book, clear, deliberate, line by line. The morning of April 10th, 2023 arrived damp and gray, the kind of Boston morning where the mist clings to the windshield like a film. At 6:15 a.m., Ethan pulled the Corolla up to the curb in front of our brownstone. The trunk was empty except for my modest suitcase, a navy roller bag with a frayed handle, and a worn leather tote holding my book and travel papers. The street smelled of wet asphalt and blooming trees still reluctant to flower. Neither of us said much on the drive. The wipers swept back and forth, their steady rhythm filling the silence. The city rolled past in streaks of red taillights and steam rising from manholes. I watched Ethan's hands on the steering wheel, the veins in his knuckles, the way he glanced at me from time to time as if checking to see if I was still there. At the drop-off lane of Logan, he put the car in park and turned toward me. His hair was damp from the mist, he looked both older and younger in that moment. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small cream-colored envelope, the flap carefully sealed. "Open this on the plane," he said, pushing it toward me. I raised an eyebrow. "You're not asking for money, are you?" I teased, a smile tugging at my mouth. He laughed, a quick, shy sound, and shook his head. "Just read it later." We hugged briefly, not the desperate, clinging hug of months past, but something steadier, almost like equals. Then I pulled my suitcase from the trunk and headed into the terminal, glancing back once to see him watching me before merging into traffic. Security was slow but routine. Shoes off, laptop out, belt off. The TSA agent wished me a good trip, and for a moment it felt like a benediction. Once past the checkpoint, I bought a small powdered sugar donut and a paper cup of coffee from the kiosk near Gate B12. The loudspeaker called out destinations: Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas. My flight number blinked on the screen above the gate. On board, once the plane leveled above the clouds, I reached into my tote and opened Ethan's envelope. Inside was a single page, folded into quarters. His handwriting was uneven but careful. "Mom, thank you for the first time you didn't rescue me. I will pay the debts. I will replace Dad's trumpet. I will repay you with a decent life. I used to think you were an unshakable wall. Turns out you're a door." I read it twice, the words blurring as my eyes stung. Carefully, I folded the letter back up, pressing it to my chest for a moment before tucking it into my book. Outside the window, the clouds parted to reveal the brown ribbons of the Mississippi winding below. In my ears, I could almost hear Marcus's bass line thumping like a heartbeat beneath the plane. The captain's voice came over the intercom: "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport." I smiled at the coincidence, feeling a quiet thrill rise in me. The name felt like an omen, a trumpet call to a new beginning. The plane touched down at Louis Armstrong International just after noon, sunlight pouring through the oval window like melted brass. By the time I wheeled my bag through the terminal, my skin felt warm again after months of Boston chill. The smell hit me first: chicory coffee, fried dough, and something earthy, like damp riverbank. Marcus was there at the edge of the arrivals hall, leaning casually against a column. He wore a crisp white linen shirt and a straw fedora tilted back, a small purple blossom tucked into his pocket. His smile was a little crooked, the same one I remembered from school. When he stepped forward, I caught a whiff of aftershave, clean, woody, faintly like oak barrels. "Welcome to New Orleans, my librarian," he said with a playful bow. I laughed, a sound that surprised me. "And you're still a showman," I replied, clutching the handle of my suitcase. He reached for it automatically, but I held on. "I've got it," I said. It felt important to carry my own bag. He only nodded and offered his arm instead. Outside, the sunlight was liquid gold. The cab ride into the French Quarter rolled past pastel houses with wrought iron balconies, flower boxes spilling with ferns. Street musicians set up at every corner, trumpets gleaming, snare drums rattling like beads in a tin. We stopped at Café du Monde. The awning fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of beignet was everywhere. At a small green table, Marcus ordered for us. When the waiter set down the plates, powdered sugar drifted into the air like a slow snowfall, dusting my black sweater. Still as graceful as ever, Marcus teased, handing me a napkin. I bit into the beignet, hot, airy, sweet, and closed my eyes for a moment. This tastes like childhood and rebellion at the same time, I murmured. He chuckled. Wait until I show you the river. He pointed beyond Jackson Square, where spires of St. Louis Cathedral pierce the sky. There's a place where the levee curves. Good for thinking. We walked slowly, weaving through artists with their canvases propped on easels, tarot readers calling out, brass bands playing when the saints go marching in. The city moved as if today were the only day that mattered. By late afternoon we stood at the edge of the Mississippi. The river was broad and brown, a living thing, tugging at the pilings. A tugboat pushed past, blowing a long, mournful horn that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. Warm wind lifted my hair, and for the first time in years I felt the weight of Boston slide from my shoulders. In this city, Marcus said quietly, hands resting on the railing, no one's ashamed to begin again. I looked at him, at the water, at my own hands. Maybe that's why I came, I said softly. That night he took me to the Spotted Cat Music Club. The doors swung open on a cloud of saxophone and laughter. His friend was setting up for the first set, tuning a trumpet that caught the stage lights. Want to read one of your poems between songs? Marcus teased, eyes twinkling. I shook my head, smiling. Let me listen first, I said. But my heart was already reading a long, quiet poem to itself, a poem about rivers, doors, and second chances. By the third day in New Orleans, the city's rhythm had started to seep under my skin. Morning light spilled like honey across cracked sidewalks in Bywater, and the smell of coffee and fried dough still lingered on my clothes from breakfast. Marcus picked me up in his old Ford van, the one with the bass clef sticker on the bumper, and drove us down Dauphine Street, pointing out murals, antique shops, and corner bars that seemed to exhale music even at noon. We stopped in front of a weathered two-story building on the corner, 3215 Dauphine. The paint was peeling in shades of turquoise and cream, the windows boarded up but etched with faint letters from some old sign. A fig tree grew stubbornly from a crack in the sidewalk, its leaves casting dappled shadows over the door. Marcus hopped out, keys jingling, and motioned for me to follow. This place just came up for lease, he said, eyes bright. I can already hear a band playing near the back while people read up front. Inside, the air smelled of dust and wood, but sunlight streamed through the high windows. There was a long counter that could have been a cafe bar, and alcoves where shelves might stand. Marcus walked through slowly, tapping the floor with his shoe as if testing its heartbeat. It could be a bookstore-café, he said, turning to me. A place for stories and jazz. What do you think? I traced my hand over the faded wallpaper, imagining rows of books, warm lamps, someone reading aloud to a small crowd. What would we call it? I asked. Marcus grinned. What about haze and brass? I laughed, the sound echoing in the empty space. It sounds like a marriage between books and brass horns, I teased. He didn't smile back this time, instead his expression softened into something earnest. I'm serious. I'll put up the money for repairs. You curate the books, recruit volunteers to read to kids or seniors. Friday nights we host live sets. I hesitated, feeling the weight of it. My fingers tightened around my tote. It's risky, I whispered. I'm just a retired librarian with a box of index cards. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low but steady. You're not just a keeper of index cards. You're a keeper of memories. And memories are exactly what people pay to touch, especially in a city like this. That evening back at my little guest house in Marigny, I opened my notebook on the narrow desk. The ceiling fan clicked above me while I scribbled down half-formed plans, opening hours, sections of books, a Friday night music schedule. In the margin I drew a tiny trumpet. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan, Mom, I got hired as an EMT assistant at Boston Medical. I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. After all these months, he was learning to save people the right way, not the way we'd been doing before. I set the phone down and looked back at the notes for Hayes and Brass. Outside, a saxophone wailed from somewhere down the street. The sound curled around me like a promise. Maybe everyone, in their own way, was learning to rescue something. The nights in New Orleans had their own texture, damp and soft, with the smell of magnolia drifting through open shutters. By my second week there, a rhythm had begun to form. Mornings were for planning Hayes and Brass, afternoons for errands and walks along the river, and nights for quiet check-ins with the people I loved. On one such night, my phone buzzed while I was labeling boxes of donated books in the back of the shop. It was nearly midnight, but Ethan's name flashed across the screen. I wiped the dust from my hands and answered. His voice came through bright but tired. "Mom, first night shift," he said between breaths. "I'm exhausted, but it's a good kind of exhausted." In the background I could hear the faint echo of a hospital corridor, an intercom announcement, footsteps squeaking on linoleum. I smiled into the receiver. "That's the sound of real work," I said. He went on quickly, like a child eager to show a good report card. "I paid the $350 this month already. And I got $50 in tips from that Saturday carpentry job. I'm keeping track now." I leaned against the counter, the old wood warm under my palm. "That's what grown-ups do," I said softly. "I'm proud of you, Ethan." Later, a message popped up from Tiffany. It was simple, typed at 12:47 a.m., "I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you." Another followed a minute later, "I'm taking an evening accounting class at Bunker Hill Community College. Trying to straighten out my side too." I typed back slowly, choosing each word, "Good luck." My boundaries still stand. When I hit send, I felt no sting of guilt, only a steady, even breath. During the day, I continued shaping the shop. I penciled in shelves, Southern literature. The history of slavery. The evolution of jazz. Marcus, in rolled-up sleeves, hammered at a small bar in the corner. "Chicory coffee," he grinned, holding up a bag. "Even Boston will forget its snowstorms when they taste this." At night the rain often came, drumming on the tin roof like a quiet drumline. I would curl up in the little reading nook with a thin book of Elizabeth Bishop's poetry, her words mixing with the hiss of rain. Sometimes Marcus would linger nearby, wiping his hands on a rag after finishing some repair. "Are you ready to stay?" he asked once, leaning against the doorway. I looked up from the page, half smiling. "I'm ready to stay with myself," I said, half joking, half serious. He chuckled, a low bass note in the dim room. Outside, the street was slick with rain and the scent of powdered sugar still clung to my coat from the morning. For the first time in years, I felt my breath come steady and full, like a song that had finally found its key. By October 2023 the heat in New Orleans had softened, the air warm but no longer oppressive. The sunlight angled differently now, slanting through the shop windows of Hayes and Brass like gold ribbons across the wooden floor. I had been here for 6 months, long enough to know the names of the regulars at the corner cafe, long enough to tell which days the brass band practiced in the square. That week I stood in the back room of the shop, kneeling among stacks of books. One by one I chose the volumes that would make the journey with me from my rented room to our permanent shelves. My hands lingered on certain spines as if greeting old friends, the warmth of other suns, beloved, on writing. The covers were soft from years of turning pages, they smelled faintly of paper and a Boston winter. I stacked them into neat piles on the table, the weight of them solid and reassuring. Ethan had flown down to help for a long weekend. He'd found a small Airbnb on Chartres Street, a narrow place with a balcony of curling ironwork. In the mornings he'd arrive at the shop carrying 2 coffees and a pack of cardboard boxes from a hardware store on St. Claude. "Mom," he said, setting the boxes down, "I'm officially done with the gambling debt." He handed me a folded paper, a statement stamped paid in full. "Just 3 more months on the car loan. That's it." I looked at the paper, at his face, at the steady way he said it. "That's what I wanted to hear," I said quietly. We started folding the boxes together, the sound of tape peeling off the roll mixing with jazz drifting in from the street. Later that afternoon Tiffany appeared, her hair longer now, dressed simply in a cotton sundress. She didn't step inside but stood at the threshold, shy, as tourists passed between us. She extended a plain envelope. "For you," she said softly. Thank you." When I opened it later there was no note, only a receipt showing a balance of 0. The boots she'd once called necessary for work were paid off in full. I ran my thumb over the paper, feeling an odd sense of closure. Everyone, it seemed, was making their own repayments. On October 21st we opened Hayes and Brass. We hung a rough cloth banner above the door, hand-painted letters curling like a river. Inside we placed small candles in jars on each table, their flames flickering against the bookshelves. Marcus tuned his bass in the corner, his fingers moving like a prayer over the strings. When the crowd gathered, neighbors, musicians, a few curious tourists, Marcus plucked the opening notes of a slow, rolling melody. I stepped up to the little platform we called a stage and read aloud a passage about towns built by rivers and the memories they hold. The words felt like they rose from my chest, traveling through all the years behind me before landing here. My phone buzzed. Ethan was back at the Airbnb but watching through a video call. His face appeared on the screen, smiling. "Mom," he said, "you're smiling like someone in love." I laughed into the camera, the sound caught by the shop's high ceiling. "I'm in love with the city," I said. "With books. And with the way I'm living now." The people in the shop began to clap, first softly, then louder, until the sound filled the room like wind rushing through an open door. It wasn't just applause, it felt like a tide washing through all the old years, carrying away the heaviness. For a moment I stood there, the candles flickering, Marcus's bass humming, Ethan's smile glowing on my phone, and realized that this was what it meant to start over. By the first weeks of 2024, the shop smelled of coffee grounds and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to your sweater like memory. One cold morning, as the sun barely cleared the rooftops, I opened the mail behind the counter at Hayes and Brass. Among the invoices and flyers sat a crisp envelope from Boston Medical Center. Inside, printed in neat black type, was Ethan's official transfer notice. He'd been promoted from assistant EMT to a full emergency technician. At the bottom, a new salary figure. I ran my thumb over the raised seal, feeling something warm uncurl in my chest. Later, on a video call, Ethan showed me his new apartment in Jamaica Plain. 19 Green Street, he said proudly, turning the camera so I could see the small kitchen, the scuffed wooden floors, the mint plants sitting on the windowsill. "I'm trying to keep something alive besides myself," he joked. His hair was longer now, his shoulders broader. "I like it," I told him. "It looks like a place someone can breathe." "And Mom," he added, lowering his voice, "I'm still sending the payments on time. All of them." I smiled. "I don't doubt you anymore," I said. Tiffany wrote a short message a few weeks later. She'd started seeing someone new, a gentle nurse she met in class. I felt a quiet gladness for her, no bitterness, no echoes of the sharp words from that Thanksgiving. People grow in their own time. Hayes and Brass had settled into its own rhythm by then. Mornings began with children curled up on beanbags while volunteers read aloud from picture books. Afternoons brought students, tourists, retired neighbors sipping chicory coffee. And Friday nights, the air thick with brass and laughter. Marcus's bass would set the tempo, friends joining on trumpet or drums, while books on the shelves hummed their own silent music. Marcus and I had never spoken of marriage. Instead we signed a partnership contract, our signatures side by side like two notes in a chord. We gave each other space, learned the art of respecting freedom. Sometimes, after closing, he'd stay to wipe down the bar while I stacked returned books, and our silence felt companionable, like a good jazz improvisation, each leaving room for the other. Some evenings I'd simply sit outside on the levee, watching the Mississippi shift colors under the sunset, copper to rose, rose to deep blue. Barges moved slowly upriver, horns low and mournful. My hands rested on my knees, palms open. At 66 I had begun again, and it wasn't late at all, just right on time, like a jazz note landing where it should. I thought back to that explosive Thanksgiving, the one that cracked my life open. If it hadn't happened, I might still be the walking wallet, the soft wall everyone leaned on. Instead, I had become Nora, keeper of books, keeper of boundaries, keeper of promises to herself. And now I wonder, and this is the question I leave with you, when an unexpected knock comes at your door, when opportunity looks strange or messy or dusted with powdered sugar, will you open it? Or will you stay where you are, afraid of a little sweetness on your sleeve? As I closed the shop that evening, the Mississippi glimmers under the last streaks of sunset, and Marcus locks the door beside me. The brass notes from our Friday session still float in the air, mixing with the smell of chicory coffee and old pages. My hands linger on the sign that says Hayes and Brass, tracing the letters as if they were the chapters of a long book finally reaching its final page. Ethan has his own apartment now, his mint plant thriving, his debts behind him. Tiffany has found a softer path. And me, I have learned to hold my own life with both hands, to build something that is mine not from obligation but from choice. Looking back, it's hard to believe how everything began with a single night at a Thanksgiving table, a sharp question about a missing check, and a mother who could no longer play the hero. Yet from that night of confrontation came a slow rebuilding, plans instead of promises, boundaries instead of rescue, and the courage to start again at 66. This is not just my story, it's a reminder that love with no edges can drown both the giver and the receiver, and that boundaries, honesty, and small steps forward can turn even the messiest chapter into a new beginning. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. And if you've listened this far, leave a comment saying I'm listening. It's our way of staying connected, of knowing we're walking these stories together. Because in the end, what we've shared here is more than a tale of debts and forgiveness. It's about reclaiming your voice, about starting again no matter your age, about believing that a different melody is always waiting to be played. If my journey can spark even a small change in how you see your own life, then every word was worth it. See you in the next video.